Hey travel bosses, this week's sponsor is TripStreak. The next time you need to book a flight and you want to be able to search by preferences like lay down seats or red-eye flights or not, check out tripstreak.com/travel like a boss. That's tripstreak.com/travel like a boss.
Welcome to the Travel Like a Boss podcast, the radio show all about traveling like a boss by being your own boss. Stay tuned for weekly interviews featuring guests that have built their own online businesses. If you would like to have access to our entire back catalog, visit travellikeabosspodcast.com for instant access. And here's your host, Johnny FD.
Hey guys, this is Johnny and welcome to episode 167 of the Travel Like a Boss podcast. I'm here in Kiev, Ukraine with X.
Hey Johnny, welcome to Kiev.
Thank you very much. And just to get out of the way, you're not Professor X.
Not yet.
You're just X.
That's right.
What does that actually stand for?
So it's actually short for my real name, which is Xiaohui. It's Chinese, so people have a hard time pronouncing it. So I decided to truncate that a couple of years back.
I like it. So you and I met initially in Chiang Mai. What brought you there?
Yes, so this was probably like two and a half years back. Originally, I was kind of at that time, I was leaving my corporate job over in San Francisco and decided to kind of strike out on my own and was able to connect with a group of digital nomads, digital entrepreneurs. Many of them were saying that Chiang Mai is a very good place to kind of connect with other people on the ground, as well as a good place to baseline and, lower your lifestyle living costs while being able to reinvest that capital into your business. So I bought a one-way ticket to Thailand at that point.
I like it. So were you already working online then? Did you already have a business?
Yes. So I kind of yes and kind of no. When I bought the ticket, I didn't, but by the time I left, I did. So
that's smart. That's actually like a really good goal set where you give yourself X amount of time and say, I need to get something up and running before I get there.
Yeah, it was interesting. So what I actually told myself is probably like 6 months before I decided to quit, before I quit, I decided before like January 10th or something of that year that I will quit regardless of whether or not I had something running. So it was kind of a burn the boats mentality, which quickly then towards the end of that time period, then it started.
How many months was that total?
It was probably like 6 months prior to, yeah, maybe a little bit before that.
Okay, but that's smart. Okay, so then as you were getting closer to your one-way ticket, your one-way flight, what happened?
Yeah, so I actually went to DC BKK conference for digital nomads in Bangkok, and that really opened my eye to what's possible because I hear the podcasts, I'm online, I see what other people are doing, but at the same time, when you're on the ground and there were like, hundreds of other people who they're in different industries and whatnot, but everyone has basically achieved my goal at that time, which is to be able to have a location independence, be able to kind of travel and live in different places while working. That really kind of sparked things. And I actually got 2 clients out of that in the conference as well. So that really kickstarted things and got things going.
I like it. And then actually that's a big reason why people come to the Nomad Summit. Even though all the videos are free on YouTube, there's this podcast, there's other podcasts, there's all these blogs. But when people actually go and they meet people in person, especially other people in the audience, so not even the actual speakers who might be killing it, making 6 figures plus, but the person next to them who's making, 2 or 3, 4 grand a month, and they're like, wow, like you're just a normal guy sitting next to me and you are living this lifestyle. I can do this as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's just such a big value out of actually being on the ground and connecting with people, whether it's the Nomad Summit or even just industry conferences and things like that. Because when you're face to face in this digital age, face to face is still king for building that rapport and trust. And I think it's just so invaluable to be able to go to actual conferences and meetups.
So when you went to the DC conference in Bangkok, was that that 6-month ticket and say, I'm going to go to this conference 6 months and then just stay there in Thailand, or did you fly back?
So that was actually just for the conference itself. And then I had, after that, I pretty much just booked my ticket for later. So it was like it was October or so. So I booked it for the next year in May, I believe. And yeah, so that kind of put a stamp on things. My parents were their response was very interesting.
Yeah, cause you're Chinese American.
Yes.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the States. I moved there when I was about 6 years old.
Okay. In Texas, you said?
Yes, I bounced around a bit, but my family's home is in Texas right now.
Okay. But still like pretty traditional Asian American parents.
Yep. You go to school, you become a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer.
And you went to college?
Yes, I did. I went to college on the East Coast.
At Duke?
Yes.
Which is an Ivy League?
Yes. Very expensive too.
So Asian parents' dream come true?
Yes.
And then the worst nightmare?
Kind of, yeah. My dad was more receptive to it because I feel like he's probably a bit more entrepreneurial, risk taking, being the one who took us from China to the States. My mom is much more traditional in her mindset, so she was, reasonably freaked out. But I think like at the end of the day, they realized like this is something that I need to do, and this is like where my talents and vision align. And they just hope that I succeed in what I'm doing, right? So.
Do you think they were also secretly hoping that you would go for a few months and just come back?
I'll bet. They had that in the back of their mind. Even after like the business took off and it was running well, my mom would always call me and say, "Hey, when are you going back to school?"
So did you actually work after you graduated from Duke?
Yeah. So I actually, like I mentioned, I was in San Francisco for almost 2 years. I actually started an internship with that company while in school in my last semester. And then I moved over to San Francisco full time and kind of learned the ropes of the industry with that company. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about that company. It was great. I got to work closely with the CEO and we're still in really good terms to date. And I think it was really, really good because even though I had this vision of ultimately kind of starting my own business, or it still gave me that like practical experience in the commercial world to be able to navigate my own business, which, there's a lot of intangibles that you're learning as well as hard knowledge.
So was this an internship or an actual job?
It was a job. So it started as an internship and then transitioned full time. So yeah, I was full time for like 1.5 years or so.
And what made you decide, to make this big move?
Yeah, a deeper question there, right? But I think like ultimately my main drive at that moment, and as we progress in life, our motivations change, but main drive at that moment is I really, really had a bad case of wanderlust. Like I knew I really wanted to have a lot of experiences, especially when I'm younger, when I have the energy and have the motivation, particularly around traveling, seeing the world and, being exposed to different cultures and really just having a full experience. So I'd say my primary drive at that moment was more freedom and exploration.
What sparked that?
Good question. I think that goes down probably to just personality, and even in childhood, I think I'm always like experimenting and always curious about like different cultures, different ways things work. So I think that's a natural extension of that core sort of like personality motivation. And whatever form that takes, it kind of transmutes itself, right? So for example, now like after I have traveled around quite a bit and all of that, now I think it's more like business focused and how can I explore new frontiers within the business world, right? I
like it. What's funny is I think I've never said this to anyone, but I didn't even know I liked to travel. I just like, I never had that wanderlust. I don't recall ever like dreaming about having like a bucket list of places to go or, watching like movies like, oh, I really want to go there. I think I just kind of like randomly came on vacation and then I was like, oh wow, this actually is really cool.
Wow, that's really interesting. I think that's probably counter to a lot of people's motivations, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it's any sort of negative motivations? Like, do you feel like you might be like running from something or?
You know what? I think especially when I first came in like 2007, things were actually going really well in the US. This was the height of the boom, the real estate boom, stock market boom. And all my friends were driving 8 Series BMWs, like just nice car, like nice brand new cars. They were all buying new houses. and they had all this cash to blow. I remember going out in LA, and every time the bill came, people would fight for it. Every single time. And when my friends were like, why the hell are you leaving? I couldn't really answer it because on paper, everything seemed great. You know, if you looked at my social media, it looked like I was having the time of my life. You know, I think I even had a Porsche then.
Mm-hmm.
It was like definitely not a new one. It was like, I remember I bought like the first generation of the kind of newer looking Boxsters and then changed the headlights and taillights to look like the latest one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I was living in this big house that was costing me like, I had 2 roommates, but we were each paying $1,300.
Yep.
So it was expensive, but it was like in like the cool area of LA. So everything seemed great, but it was all like kind of a facade, you know? And it wasn't that I wasn't even trying to be like this fake LA guy. It's what I thought would make me happy. And when I got to Thailand, I was like, shit, everything that I did to try to make myself happy back in the US, like was all BS. And I was lying to myself.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So it sounds like you kind of peeled back the layers of the onion there and realized like, hey, I don't need all this stuff, all this external items to really be happy.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So you probably found that you had like different values that were truly your deeper values, like more, you know, freedom, right? For example, and things like that.
Yeah, I think so. And then the love for travel, I almost kind of came later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you peeled that out. I'm sure I wrote about it in, my first book, 12 Weeks in Thailand, but it's been so long I haven't like really thought about it too much, you know?
Exactly.
But it's crazy that how fast our lives change living this lifestyle. Like I haven't seen you in 2 or 3 years, which isn't that long.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things. I mean, we kept in contact online and stuff, but not like in-person interaction, yeah.
But like when I see my friends back home in LA or even San Francisco and I say, oh, what have you been up to? They're like, oh, not much. And then when I say, what do you mean by that? You know, we were working out. It's like, oh, same place. I'm like, oh, where are you living? Same place. You know, oh, well, you know, where do you want to go tonight? They're like, oh, let's go to Sutra Bar. And I'm like, that same place that we used to go? And I was like, you guys still go there? And it's weird. Like, I mean, I don't know. Does this happen to you when you go back?
Yeah, I get exactly the same feeling. Like literally my family lives in the suburbs. So every time I go back, I'm like, that tree has not changed. Yeah, they have some new buildings and stuff, but I think like this lifestyle really kind of warps our perception of time. So in a sense, I feel like the last, you know, let's say 3-4 years, I feel like I've crammed like 2 decades into those years. So in a sense, like without getting too philosophical, I feel like we're extending our lifetimes, at least the subjective, the length of our lives by being more exposed to different stimulus, different cultures, different items just in general from traveling.
I never thought of that way.
Yeah, we were, you know, a lot older than we actually are on paper now.
I almost kind of feel like it because experiences wise, you know, people that live this lifestyle, we've definitely seen more things, been to more places, been exposed to more cultures and experiences. It's almost like kind of cramming like 100 books into one book.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, and also what's interesting for me at least is like you kind of constantly pushing your comfort zones a bit, right? Even if it's just like going somewhere and not knowing the language and having to pantomime in the store to just buy basic necessities, you're kind of constantly pushing your comfort zones so that like sometimes when talking to like friends back at home or something that seems really, really normal to me, like, oh, I bought a ticket tomorrow, you know, to go to a different continent. They can't relate to that because, you know, we've been doing this a lot and it's very normal between you and I and others. But, perhaps for people, you know, kind of back at home or who they are living like more routine life, is not good or bad, but more routine lives, it's hard to relate.
Or are we just insane?
Quite possibly, yeah. I think there's a germ of insanity in most of us here.
Well, I mean, for example, I just arrived here in Kiev yesterday and I'm planning to stay at least a month. And I was like, okay, well, you know, should I get an apartment? And I don't think it's like commitment issues, but I just could not get myself to book a place for a whole month. Cause I'm like, well, what if I don't like it after a week? You know, I want to move. Like, I want to have the flexibility to go to Odessa and, you know, and just live there for the next, you know, month instead. So instead of me booking an Airbnb for a month, I booked it for 3 days and I said, okay, let me book it for these 3 days and then decide if I want to stay for the month. And when thinking back in the US or pretty much anywhere else in the world, when you find an apartment, like you're signing a year contract and it's normal.
Yeah, at the very least. And then most people stay, a lot longer than that. I think I'm going to have a little bit of a side point to that, right? Because definitely when I started kind of traveling a lot extensively, I was more in that mentality. But as I progressed, I feel like I'm a little bit more settled now. I mean, it's all relative, right? I'm not that settled. But I feel like I actually start getting an appreciation of routine because, like, for example, I know, like, where my gym is. I know where the grocery store is. I know, like, what the good restaurants around me are. And I appreciate that. But that being said, like, ultimately, there's still that portion that's like, hey, I could take off tomorrow and be perfectly okay with that.
I think that's actually a good balance. And that's actually what I'm trying to work towards now, where instead of coming to a new city for 3 days, and just trying to do everything and then leaving to the next city, which first off is exhausting. Second, ends up being more expensive. And then third, you don't really immerse yourself in the culture as much. And I remember, just everyone I've spoken to since I've been here, and they asked me how long I'm staying in Kiev. I said, at least a month. They look at me like I'm crazy. But in reality, I think that's actually the perfect way to be digital nomad or travel, is to go places for a minimum of a month, but maybe even up to 3 or 6 months at a time, especially when the weather is good. And then when the weather turns into slush, then you move on to the next spot, which is what you're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for me in my head, like 3-month mark is a really optimal time because it kind of gives you that time to immerse yourself and kind of establish some of your routine and feel like you have like some stable foothold. At the same time, it also coincides with a lot of these like visa requirements and tourist visas and all of that, a lot of 90-day things. Yeah, and here, now you're talking about the weather and the weather turning to slush. Yeah, so one of the downsides, I love Kiev and I love like a lot of things about it. The weather in winter is not one of those things. It is freaking cold in the winter. Like I experienced my first true Ukrainian winter this last winter, and I was not prepared for how cold it gets.
I actually remember talking to you on Facebook, and when you told me you were going to stay here with winter, I thought you were crazy, and it turns out I was right.
No, you're completely right. I still have a picture there of me like completely wrapped up in like multiple layers and I got the scarf over my mouth and everything. You see nothing but the eyes and it's crazy. It's just, I want to avoid the winter here as much as possible.
And that's the nice thing about our lifestyle is we can.
Exactly. For example, we plan on spending probably the winter in South America, which coincides with their summer, given it's in the southern hemisphere. So, and then come back next year when the weather is good again. I know you came here at the perfect time. It's green outside. It's sunny. Today it's like really warm. So you hit the spot at the right time.
Yeah, it's perfect. So what months are actually good in Kiev and when does it start getting really cold?
Yeah, so this year is very atypical because I feel like summer took forever to come, right? We're pretty much in July now, at the end of June, and finally it seems like it's here. Generally, I'd say like probably like mid-May, it starts getting pleasant, and then up through like mid-October, give or take. The first time I came here was in late August, and it was still really hot, but then literally like one weekend in early October, it just flipped a switch, and autumn came, and then winter came shortly afterwards. Very brutally.
And when winter comes, are you just indoors all day, or do people still go out to restaurants? What do you do?
I mean, people go out. Like, you still see a lot of people on the streets. It baffles me how they're able to do it. But yeah, like I try to like camp indoors a lot more during the winter and just order delivery and things like that. But yeah, like generally here in the city, everyone's still out and about. They're dressed really warmly, obviously, but they're moving around.
I don't think I can do it.
It's crazy. And you should see, I mean, the girls here all wear heels on like during the winter.
In the winter?
Yeah.
Why?
It's because, I have a theory that probably, the movie 300 and Sparta, right? They take the babies are unfit for war and cast them off very brutally. But I have a theory that, they, at birth, all Ukrainian girls get evaluated on their ability to walk in heels on ice. And the ones that don't make it, we don't hear from again. Cause literally, like, here's the thing. You haven't experienced this, right? But like, in the winter, I'm walking around, right? And like, I'm slipping and sliding, you know, I got the Vibram soles and the boots and everything, right? And then like, these girls in like, I don't know, like 6-inch heels just like zoom past me, like without a care in the world. I'm like, how is this physically possible?
So near the Opera House, there's some cobblestone roads.
Mm-hmm.
And actually when I was in Lviv last week, it's almost all cobblestone.
Yeah.
And I remember just walking at like a pretty swift pace, right?
Yeah.
And I see a Ukrainian girl with, 3-inch heels or something just zoom past me. And I'm like, trying to catch up because I'm like, there's no way she can walk faster than me in these heels on this fucking cobblestone. And I'm like, kind of like falling, like, like slipping around on these cobblestone, like little bricks. And I'm like, how are they doing this?
Practice and genetics or something.
Well, big props to that.
Yeah.
So I guess everyone wants to know, like, how are the girls here?
The hype is true. That's all I'll say.
Okay. And I think Ukraine actually, I think this is actually one of those places where I don't know why people come here, but I think people end up staying for completely different reasons.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you alluded to one of the reasons people come here, right? But I think people come here and then stay. I've seen this actually with a few of my expat friends, right? There's just this charm in Kiev in particular. I feel like there's this charm about the city. It's like you almost have a bit of a look back in time because like I'm outside, right? Right now we're here in my apartment doing this podcast and it's like a new building, modern amenities and everything. But I look out my window and there's another new one that's being constructed. And then there are these like completely Soviet, huge monolithic, ugly buildings everywhere as well. And I think that's kind of a metaphor for how I feel about the city. It's this like dichotomy between modern and kind of that Soviet era, that past era. And mixed into it, as you probably noticed, like English levels aren't very high here. They primarily speak Russian here and Ukrainian, probably a bit more Russian in Kiev. And so it has that like sort of like balance of like exoticism, but at the same time, like the modern kind of progress and like it just like such a diverse mix. And I think that really appeals to a lot of people as well.
I think I heard from like a designer and architect. They said that the best way to design, I forgot the word they used, but like, they said like feeling, of a city. So it's not just cold or boring. To really bring in some character, some warmth is to have a mixture of the old and the new.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's exactly what you described. And I think it's more than actually just modern and Soviet era. I think a lot of it kind of reminds me of something like way older than that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the 1950s or something. Like just the way that some people still act, like the family values, or, some of the buildings look like they might be from the 1800s. And it's like the last place on earth where there are white people, but it's like 50 or 100 years ago. Like it's like, I think everywhere else in the world that is westernized, it's getting almost, I don't want to say the same because, everywhere has different cultures still, but this place is completely different.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think like just generally in sort of Eastern Europe, you get that sort of feeling. And that's one of what attracted me to this part of the world, right? I've been through Western Europe, kind of did the whole backpacking trip after college thing. And it was really interesting. It was great. Beautiful architecture, lots of different culture, food, etc. But I think what was really the draw for me to come to here is because you have this almost like, you're almost in this little bit of a time capsule and looking back into like what things were both from a mentality standpoint and like a physical standpoint. But at the same time, like there are a lot of modern amenities around as well, right? Like the internet's pretty fast here, much faster than my internet at home in the States, right?
I keep forgetting how crappy the internet is back in the US.
It's quite bad. Yeah.
And it's expensive.
Oh yeah. So here it's maybe you pay like a couple bucks a month, like $3-4 a month.
Like literally.
Yeah. Literally $3 or $4 a month. And the speeds are all right. I'd say like still not like the best, even in Eastern Europe. For example, I was in Romania before and on just a regular household connection, you're getting like 100 megs down and 50 megs up, which is pretty impressive.
What are you getting here?
Probably like 20 or so.
up and down?
Yeah, it varies though. For example, like currently I think there are some issues with the internet providers. So at the end of the day, you're still in a place where the infrastructure is a little bit more wonky.
So that's actually why I like Poland so much, is because it's the perfect balance of Western Europe amenities and infrastructure, but also some of the lower prices and kind of like that feeling of Eastern Europe as well. And I think that's why I haven't decided yet. I think I'm pretty open-minded, but when Chris comes here next month, we're going to spend some time in Ukraine, see if he likes it. But then we know we're going to like Poland. So if we are going to base somewhere for the next 3 months basically till winter, it's going to be Poland.
Yeah, I like Poland a lot as well. I spent about like a month in Wrocław, which is on the west side of Poland, if I have my geography right. A little bit smaller sort of city, more student based, exactly as you described, right? Like the infrastructure is definitely better. The prices are a bit higher, of course. It's hard to kind of beat the prices here in Ukraine. And then the English levels are definitely stronger, right? So it's a good balance, like you said, between kind of price and value and culture and everything. So for me, I really like to look at the value of things. So I'd say like Poland's probably gives you a lot of good value for what you want.
Do you think that's the Asian American in us? Because I love value too.
Maybe, yeah. I think honestly, from my family standpoint, they're probably more of just stingy. But from my standpoint, yeah, definitely like value. I wouldn't mind paying for something if I think like I definitely get a disproportionately high value from it.
I'm the exact same way. And it's crazy because it explains why sometimes I'll stay in a cheap, crappy hostel that happens to be like in the city center. And then sometimes I'll stay in like a really nice hotel. It depends on like how good of a value I feel like it is.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of like take this to extremes sometimes. Like, for example, if I'm traveling in a country that is like more expensive, right? And I'm like, well, you know, I could get like a 5-star hotel in Kuala Lumpur for the same price as like, you know, a hostel here. But I just like begrudgingly don't want to pay the same level for the 5-star hotel in the more expensive country. So I'm like, okay, I'll get like a 3-star one.
Yeah. So back on the infrastructure and internet, I was here last summer and I actually feel like the infrastructure has improved a lot since then. The internet speeds seem like they've increased and definitely my 3G speeds are more stable now. Because I remember last year, first off, I didn't have Wi-Fi in as many places it felt. And then like even at my hotel, like the Wi-Fi would just be out sometimes and then I would use my 3G and then it sometimes would be out, but then the Wi-Fi would work again. So I would almost kind of switch back and forth. And this trip, and it's only been, a few days here in Kiev, so I have to report back. But like, how stable is your 3G? Is it always working?
Yeah, so I'm actually between SIM cards right now because I got a new phone. But generally, yeah, I say your anecdote about it being more stable and more accessible, it's probably true. Like my brother just visited me from the US, right? And he's like, there's Wi-Fi everywhere, right? Which I didn't really notice as much of that probably in the previous years. So can't say for sure that they're doing things well, but it seems like, you see that contrast and I kind of see it. So probably true.
Well, there's definitely more co-working spaces in Kiev now.
Yeah. I'm not a big coworker, but yeah.
But cause I remember last year when I was looking for spaces, I pretty much found one. I didn't look that hard, but I was like, okay, there's a space. And so I wrote about it, I put on my blog. And then this time I was like, wow, there is like 5 or 10. And I went to one yesterday and I was like, this is like pretty good. It almost kind of reminded me of WeWork in the US, which is it was almost like a little bit too big. So I'm going to shop around and look for some other ones, but internet speeds was good. There's a huge IT and tech scene here now. And I think Ukraine is really pumping out like people in the IT and startups scene.
Yeah, there's a lot of development talent. You have to comb through it because, like I said, I think English levels is probably the main hindrance for developers and just for human resources in general. It's hard to find someone who has the language abilities in addition to technical abilities, right? But if you're selecting just for technical abilities, for example, if you have like a manager who's translating, right, then it opens up the pool a lot wider for what kind of talent you can find.
And the labor is cheap here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably one of the cheapest places in Europe, if not the cheapest place.
Yeah, I think so. I looked up the average salary for Ukrainians, and here in the capital, so in Ukraine itself, the average salary is $200 a month.
Yeah, the capital is higher, but if you get to the smaller cities, cost of living is significantly cheaper than Kiev. And so, yeah.
And even here in Kiev, I think it was something like $350.
Sounds about right.
Which is insane.
Yep.
And this isn't the minimum wage. This is average salary for like an office worker.
Yep. That being said, I think like one of my theories is like the average salary anywhere in the world in a big city, right, just barely gets you by. And so I think it's the same story here. If not, like, it's probably even a little harder to get by on that. But that said, you know, it's the numbers are pretty much accurate from my experience.
So how much do you actually spend living here a month?
So for my girlfriend and I, we probably spend between like 1,000 to 1,500 a month all in. Some month, I mean, like obviously if we make a big purchase, then it's going to go up. But generally that's probably what we spend. We spend about like $530 for an apartment currently. And then the rest just pretty much go to food, honestly, because transportation costs are negligible. And so like food and maybe some clothing. So
15 cents to take the metro from here to the city center.
Yeah, that's if you don't have other discount cards and stuff.
There's discount cards for that?
Yeah. Like there's discount cards. Like if you buy in bulk, right, you get like a slight discount. Obviously, like many other places, there's student discounts and things like that. So the transportation costs are really doesn't affect people at all.
And the Uber here is super cheap as well.
It is relative to probably most of the world. I did notice in Kuala Lumpur, the Ubers were even cheaper.
Wow, really?
Yeah, in KL, like a 20-minute ride on Uber costs like $1.30 or something.
Okay, and here it'd be like $2.
Yeah, it'd be like $3 maybe. Okay. Yeah, something like that.
Which is insane because in LA, I paid $70 to get from LAX to my cousin's house in Brea, which is normal, without traffic, it would be like half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously there's traffic and then it's LA Uber prices. So $70. And here it costed me, I think an Uber would have been $3. But I decided to take, what did I do? I think I took a train or something just because I wanted to. It was like 15 cents.
Yeah. Yeah. I took the metro, I think. The cost of transportation in the States is just ridiculous. I mean, I lived in San Francisco for a while, right? It is like $20 to get you a couple of miles if you're lucky. So I'd say that's definitely a huge difference here. I mean, even like pretty much everything, but transportation in particular.
Yeah. So food costs are pretty low too. What's like your average meal price?
Yeah, in terms of like eating out and stuff. So it depends on where you eat out. We have a lot of sushi and pizza and things like that, right? But even there, like for example, if you get sushi for 2 people in a sit down restaurant, probably costs you about like, I don't know, $15 to $20. And then of course there are also deals and stuff. So sometimes you can go and call in and you get like 2 for 1s. So you get like 2 meals of sushi for 2 people for $20. If you eat at like kind of self-serve restaurants or these like, like business diners, whatnot, yeah, I'd probably spend like $3 or $4 a person, something like that for a very sizable meal, right? And if you eat less, it'll be even less. So
I eat a lot. So every time I go to those cafeteria style restaurants, I end up just because I think of it as a buffet, but then I forget that at the end they charge you per item. So I always end up spending like 150 hryvnia, which is maybe $8 or so. So I was like, you know what? It's definitely cheaper here, but it's not like surprisingly going out to restaurants isn't that cheap. Like you could still easily spend $30 on a dinner for 2 people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also the fact that we are in the capital. For example, I know you just came in from Lviv that you spent a couple days in, and I was there like 2 weekends ago. And it's even cheaper.
It's so cheap there. It is ridiculously cheaper. I just finished my blog post. If you guys want to read it, it's johnnyfd.com/Ukraine. And I added a Lviv section, which should have been a whole post by itself. Even just like where to eat in Lviv should have been a whole post by itself because it's so cheap and it's so good.
Yes, so good and so unique. There are a lot of unique restaurants there in different themes. Like there's one that is right under like a military like weapons museum, and all they serve is ribs, and the waiters come across with like these axes. Yeah.
I went there. Was it you that suggested that?
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
Ribs under Arsenal. And surprisingly, actually, the price jumped significantly since last year. So it used to be like $2.50. Now it's like
$3.50.
$3.50. So be careful, guys.
I know. You know, you guys need to come here soon because what do you think is going to happen with their economy? Do you think things are going to get more expensive?
Yeah, I'd say in the longer term, definitely, right? Like, I mean, like you see, and I won't get too political here, right? But like, for example, Ukrainians now can travel to, European countries, the EU, Schengen zone with their passport, without like crazy visas. Whereas it took a long time for that to actually happen. And so I feel like people are probably definitely, in general, their mentality is moving towards progress and, becoming more developed. So I'd imagine that things will definitely become more expensive, but also more modernized as we move along. Honestly, like Ukraine in the past few years have kind of suffered quite a bit from like economic instability and obviously political issues. So like, whereas before, a couple of years back, it used to be like $1 to 8 Ukrainian hryvnias. Now it's about $1 to 26 Ukrainian hryvnias, right? And the prices go up significantly while like the salaries and stuff.
Let's pause there for a second and put that in perspective. So it used to be that your money would get you, let's say, so 1 to 8, now it's 1 to 26, which is more than 3 times. So basically everything now, your money is worth a third of what it used to be.
Yeah, a third. Obviously, like prices have gone up as well to match, but at least it's probably at least double, right? You get double the value or so.
And so I've actually asked a few people this. I said, how much have prices actually gone up? Like how much was inflation compared to the currency? And most people that I met, at least, they said that things are definitely more expensive, but they're maybe 50% more expensive. They're not 300 times more expensive.
Yeah. So the currency exchange rate has outpaced for sure kind of the inflation across the board.
So I think my theory is that this is the best time right now to visit Ukraine if you want a great deal, because it's not that Ukraine is that cheap to live in, just like how Russia isn't actually that cheap. If you go to Moscow, St. Petersburg, it's expensive.
Very expensive, yeah.
I have a feeling that Kiev, at least, is similar to that. And the only reason why things are so cheap for us is because their currency is currently devalued.
Yeah, I think that plays a big part in it for sure. I think even at like regular rates, it'll still not be like super expensive compared to, I don't know, like Switzerland or something, but at the same time, like as the current situation stands, that's where we really get a tremendous value.
Because if the currency went back to 1 to 8, which it could, that means that everything would cost us 3 times as much. And then all of a sudden a $1.50 beer would now be $4.50. A $4 meal would now be $12. And then it'll be almost on par to like Houston prices.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair observation. I don't think it's gonna like kind of overnight do the jump, right? Usually like the currency falls happen faster, right? But there might be a gradual sort of bridging of that gap.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that's gonna happen. That's why I want to enjoy it as much as I can now while it's a great deal. And while it's a little bit almost kind of like undiscovered, like there's, I travel to a lot of places, and when I post photos or something, you should be like, oh, I've been there too. It's great. But then as soon as I start posting about Ukraine, everybody's like, what? Where are you? Like they just want to know about it because really like nobody comes here.
Exactly. And I kind of like that kind of a more unexplored element to it. And, yeah, definitely. I think that's good advice. At the same time, after this podcast, I think we're getting a huge influx maybe.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see how adventurous people are, because it's not easy to travel here.
No, definitely one of the harder places. Like I said, like based on my experience traveling through Europe, even Eastern Europe, like it can get by with English levels, especially like the younger generation. They have a decent command of it. In Ukraine, like in the center, it's even a little bit hard. If you go outside of the center, you gotta speak some Russian or Ukrainian, or else like you're screwed basically.
And did you learn Russian or Ukrainian?
I'm in the process. I'm learning Russian. My Russian is quite rough still. It's a difficult language for me.
And how have you been learning it?
it's kind of off and on. So I've had private tutors. I kind of use online resources, and yeah, that's kind of my general approach to things. I found that like accountability is the most important. Accountability and consistency is the most important element to that, but I'm sure, the other language learning experts probably have different opinion. I'm not very good at languages, to be honest.
But you already speak English and you speak Mandarin?
Yeah, I speak English, Mandarin, trying
Spanish?
to brush up on my Spanish because we'll be spending some time in South America, and then very rudimentary Russian still.
So I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to try to learn some basic Russian while I'm here.
Do it.
I was actually trying to I downloaded the Duolingo Ukrainian program when I was in Lviv because everyone there spoke Ukrainian, and I want to support the culture and the country and speak Ukrainian, but I know that from a point of view of just like usability worldwide and even almost kind of easier learning, it's like, it just doesn't make sense for me to learn it. And I feel bad. I really feel bad. I really want, you like to support Ukraine and be like, okay, I'm going to learn Ukrainian. I'm not going to learn Russian, but it's like learning a language that people only speak in that one country while everyone else speaks the other language.
Exactly. It's like learning I don't know, like Hungarian or something, right?
Or Swedish.
Yeah, exactly. Or Swedish, where everyone speaks perfect English,
Yeah.
right? It's just you don't get as much return for it, and honestly, you got to spend quite a bit of time and dedication to it, right? So I'm completely on the same page with you. The way I see it is like if, for example, English and Chinese, two of the top spoken languages, right? But then you throw in Spanish and Russian, and
then you're set.
Yeah, then you got pretty much the whole world, right?
Yeah,
You're still missing
except for
a couple.
the French. Nobody cares about
French. Yeah, French. Different dialects of Arabic, right? Maybe Portuguese, given Brazil is huge, but otherwise, we cover a pretty big chunk of the world with just those four.
Yeah, I like it. So what are you actually doing for work? I remember you telling me 2-3 years ago, and it kind of just glazed over me, and I honestly, I still don't really know.
Yeah, so I haven't changed at all. So what I do is I run a marketing agency, and we're focused on email marketing channel. And our customer base, they're all e-commerce stores. So mostly B2C e-commerce retailers, but a few B2B ones.
So are these like big brands, or are they like FBA sellers or dropshippers, or what type of customers do you have?
Yeah, they all have their independent sites and do a good chunk of revenue from the sites, because it's just like less we can do with like Amazon stuff because of Amazon's terms of service and marketing to the customers. They generally aren't like, for example, right now we don't work with, like the Walmarts of the world or anything like that. But yeah, so the teams vary between smaller mom and pop shops to ones that are more established, with, 20, 30 million in revenue. But yeah, they're all within a certain niche, like a different niche, right? So we have beauty products, we got vitamins, we got apparel, and many other ones as well.
And are these all US based companies?
Mostly US, but also a sizable chunk from Australia and a couple from the United Kingdom as well. So pretty much the major players in the English speaking world for now.
And how did you actually get involved in this?
Well, when I was in the previous agency in San Francisco, we were doing something similar. So that's kind of my first exposure and learning the ropes there. And then when I struck out on my own, started off with like more just generally consulting. And then the demand was pretty high, so we pretty much grew from there.
Nice. And where do you find most of your clients now?
We have a bunch of different marketing channels, right? Some from partner referrals, like software we work with, or other agencies who refer people, from client referrals, trickling from podcasts, from forums, content marketing, conferences as well. So it's a pretty healthy mix right now. Of course, we're always seeking to branch out.
So it's mainly geared towards people that have like a pretty big established e-commerce business. I'm sure you have like some minimums. You don't want to work with someone who's just starting out.
Yeah, kind of. So we've definitely also scaled up a bit since the very beginning, right? So we were working with a bit smaller shops at the very beginning, and now we have a bit higher minimums, right? That being said, like if someone is starting out and has funding, for example, then we can definitely jump in and help them like get it kickstarted. But otherwise, if it's more of the long-term sort of engagement, managed services, then obviously, you have to make them numbers work, right? So if your list or your store is just in the beginning stages, it's just hard for us, for the customer to justify our rates.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And so I'm sure it changes, but like, what is the type of customer like you're looking for right now? Like what budget, what price point, what size?
Yeah, so I give you like a general range that's pretty big range, right? But probably between like 1 to like 20, 25 million annual revenue would be like our target market. So sort of that like lower mid market in the grand scheme of e-commerce. That's our sweet spot right now. So not really enterprise and not really like 2-month-old stores.
Okay. And most of the clients do they have warehouses? Are they drop shipping? How they selling your products?
Yeah. So usually it's like a combination. So they drop ship some of their inventory and then the rest, they have their own warehouses. Yeah. Cause as you know, like drop shipping is good, but if it's 100% that, the margins give you a little bit less room to play with.
But I guess if they're doing 1 to 25 million, they're probably doing okay.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay. I like it. And this is something that you can do from anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like, especially our client base, because they are more digitally savvy, I guess. If you run an e-commerce store, you kind of have to be more digitally savvy, right? I haven't really had any complaint ever about working remotely, right? So they're used to working with remote developers, remote designers, other agencies. So I think it's really good to sort of be in the industry at this time because everyone's pretty open to, we have people all across Eastern Europe and Asia as well. So our clients are all really open to that.
Yeah, that's cool. So like when you first meet them, I guess you're meeting them online anyways or at a conference. So they're kind of open to that. Like, do you feel like if you were based in the US, you would have access to like bigger clients, or do you think it doesn't matter?
Yeah, that's a question I'm asking myself like a lot, right? Just contemplating like where I would establish like a little bit more longer term location wise and what the advantages are and all that. Right now, I don't have the strict answer to that, but I think in general, yes, because of course, like, being on the ground in person and in a more established economy like the United States, then you're going to have access to bigger clients and there's that serendipity effect as well. So I do feel like a bit isolated being out of the central hub, right? But at the same time, I think like, at least like our current marketing channels, a lot of it is like digital based. So that helps like kind of brunt that blow a bit.
Okay. That makes sense. And do you how are your working hours while you're out here? Because we're in a different time zone.
Yeah. running a remote team is a little difficult with the working hours, right? So what we generally do is we do like kind of 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern European time. So that gives us like some overlap in the mornings with US clients, and then our mornings, sometimes we're able to catch the end of day with Australian clients. So that kind of bridges that gap. I have 2 people currently in Asia as well. So they're working like later hours until like midnight, 1 a.m. So that's how it generally plays out. Well, being the entrepreneur and the business owner, right? Like my hours tend to fluctuate a bit. So I might be working earlier and more likely later than those parameters to match up more exactly with like US based clients. So I find it like a good sort of middle ground. Ultimately, though, I think like personally, I prefer just working completely on US time whenever possible. It's just like not as feasible being here. And then Asia time is really painful.
Yeah, I can see that. When I was calling suppliers at 2 or 3 in the morning when it was 8 a.m. for them, it was tough. I actually remember going cause I wouldn't be able to stay awake until that late. So I would go out to like Zoe's, the bar, and drink, and then come back at like 1 or 2 in the morning and then like be like, hi, good morning.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that is mentioned there is like when you have this like kind of second shift lifestyle, right? Like for example, when I was in Asia in the beginning, I was working until like 5 a.m. or something like that, and then waking up at like 2 p.m. or 1 or 2 p.m. And it just like, it takes a toll on your body. And I just I use sleeping masks and black out the windows and things like that, but it's just somehow your rhythms are thrown off.
Still your body knows. So was it easier than being in South America because it was a US time zone?
So I haven't actually touched South America yet. So this might be my first foray there. But like, for example, when I was back home in Houston for a little bit for some conferences, a couple months ago, I really actually enjoyed that because, I could wake up like 7:30, 8 a.m. and catch like half the day with my team here. It's a very very filled half a day, right? So literally sometimes I wake up at 8:30 and have back-to-back calls all the way until like 1 p.m. But then like after that, it kind of becomes silent and you're like, oh, I accomplished a lot today. It's only like 1 p.m. and yeah, it feels good to get a head start there.
I actually remember when I was back in the US, I felt like I got more done, and I felt like I can respond to emails faster. I can pick up calls myself, so I can close more deals. I can just grow the business more. But then there's that trade-off of, first off, kind of like the lifestyle, and then also being able to kind of bootstrap, because you're making US dollars, but you're spending Ukrainian hryvnia. That is the ultimate currency hack.
Yeah, that's currency arbitrage right there, right? I think it's more important in the beginning as you're getting established, because every dollar is really, really important, right? But I think like as you progress, I'm kind of at probably a year or two away from like a true turning point, but I'm kind of at that turning point where I'm like, okay, well, if I, for example, base myself back in the US, yes, my lifestyle costs will rise, but the opportunity and, you know, being surrounded by people doing big things and all of that, I think that will far outweigh the increase in the lifestyle costs, right? And of course, like I'm speaking for the position here where, you know, the numbers are bigger and you can, you know, move things around a bit, but definitely it kind of depends on what stage you are at, I think.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I'm kind of at this weird stage right now where I know if I lived somewhere like back in the US, I would probably make a lot more money and then it wouldn't matter. But at the same time, living in places like here in Chiang Mai, I can slowly grow my income and then just save 75% of it, which I know back in the US is pretty much impossible. I don't think anyone in the US saves 75% of their income.
Yeah, it'll be a lot harder just, you know, from even like subconscious peer pressure and things like that, right? It all affects things. And I think ultimately, this is a little bit more of a soul searching question and one that I'm working my way through, right? It's like, what pace is your natural pace and like what kind of your ambitions are and what goals you have, right? Like if you want to start the next Uber, right? I mean, there are like huge startups, you know, for example, Skype started in Eastern Europe and stuff. You can do it. But at the same time, it's like there are that investor infrastructure and things in Silicon Valley and other places in the US, right, that help with that. Like you're saying though, like if you want to kind of take things at a slower pace, continue to work on your income, work on your lifestyle, all of that, but just without like perhaps more of the stress, then your strategy might work better.
Well, I think you even hit a good point about the peer pressure, just keeping up with the Joneses. Whenever I'm back in the US, or even when I'm in a big city, even when I was in Spain, I felt like I was underdressed and I need to buy like better shoes. You know, I felt like I needed to just, you know, like I felt like I needed to go out and buy a leather jacket. You know, like it was just these little things that I don't ever think about when I'm in Chiang Mai, because it just, first off, it's too hot to even wear anything but shorts and a t-shirt. But second, you just don't care. Nobody cares. You know, like, you know, and there are people, you know, making, you know, well over six figures, and then people are bootstrapping and making $1,000 a month, and they're both dressed exactly the same, and nobody cares. Nobody has a car. Nobody spends money on luxury goods or anything.
Yeah, I think there's that element for sure. Another point I want to make there is like when you do have a little bit more of a home base, then you start naturally accumulating things more. Like I pride myself in not owning very much. Like, I mean, I my whole life was in half a suitcase for a good part of like 2.5 years, but like being a little bit more longer term in Kiev here and, you know, being a little bit more established, like I just find that I start accumulating some things like, and then I'm looking at the closet and just like it starts to fill up. And I think it's just like a byproduct there, where you're not really like forced to as much to change locations all the time. So you can afford to have some more stuff. But ultimately, I mean, it depends on the individual, but I feel like having all like the latest and greatest stuff, that's not like really my priority.
That's good. So are you going to keep this apartment when you go to South America, or are you going to give it up?
No, we're going to give it up. Because we're going to be gone for so long, probably like 9 months or something until next summer. It just doesn't make sense to keep paying for it if we're not just going to be here.
Yeah, and that's good that you can just kind of refresh and force yourself to clean house and be light again.
Kind of. So my girlfriend does live in Kiev, and she does have a place here that she kind of owns. So like we do have some like storage space if you want to think about it that way. So it's like, it's not like we're throwing everything away, right? But at the same time, like you can only pack so much in a carry-on and your checked luggage. So that forces us to really pick and choose like the items that are more essential or items that we use a lot.
That'd be exciting. So there's one thing that I just found out about Kiev or Ukraine is that I heard their banks, like just like a savings account, I heard they pay like 20% interest.
Yeah, like 20-25% interest. I wouldn't put any of my money in here, not as investment advice, but personally I wouldn't, because the instability. I mean, like generally returns are linked to risk, right? And the instability is ridiculous. I've, personally know people who have had banks close, lose all their savings. A couple months ago, the biggest bank here, like the head of the bank just like absconded with a couple $1 billion. So like it's not a very stable sort of infrastructure for financing right now. So I would keep the bulk of your net worth probably away from that, at least my net worth.
Do you have a local bank account?
Yes, but it's not used very much. I don't keep a lot in there.
I've heard that they also have kind of like their version of the FDIC where they insure it up to something like $5,000 or something.
Yeah, which is significant given, the average salary here, but it's not super significant given, if you're earning in dollars and used to that sort of scale.
I'm almost thinking like maybe I should just put $5,000 into a bank account here. Almost kind of take that risk because 20% interest, like for a savings account.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, I won't sway your advice either way there, but I'm just kind of bearish in terms of like the stability and like not being a Ukrainian citizen and,
Yeah, because would that insurance even cover us?
Well, I don't know. I frankly don't know. Even if it did though, I'd say like sometimes it can be
hard to get paid out.
Yeah, like the bureaucracy here and like, let's face it, it's not everything by the book here. So there's definitely risks, but I mean, like you get rewarded for risk, right? So, it just depends on kind of your tolerance, resources, and
I'm gonna look into this because I figure there's a couple of things that can happen, right? Is one, we lose all the money, we lose $5,000, or it grows at 20%, and then there's the currency where it could get worse. It can go, right now it's at 26 to 1. It could get even worse. But in that case, I'm like, it doesn't matter because I could just come here and just like live even better as an American. But if it goes back to, 1 to 8 or just, closer to 1 to 8, not only you get 20%, but then also the value of the actual cash is worth more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think again, it goes back to like what your tolerances are, what your resources are, right? And I mean, I doubt you'll put like the bulk majority of your net worth in something like this, right? But if it's a segment of it, right, it could be a good thing.
It could be fun. How was the process of opening an account here?
Painful. So it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of documents, a lot of paperwork, a lot of go to this person, translate this, translate that. So, and again, like, like I said, it's not really by the book necessarily all the time. So like, for example, like it relates to consistency, right? So for example, you might get one person and it's like much faster, but you might be routed to someone else and just like the process is a lot longer. So there's some complexity involved.
Were you able to open your account in person in one day or just like multiple trips?
No, it took multiple trips. Part of it's my fault because I was doing my due diligence as well. So yeah, but it took multiple trips.
Okay. And did you have to prove anything? Or you just show up with your passport or what else do you need?
No, well, so I'd say my case is a little bit different because it was actually through like a company structure here. So there's like a different process. If you open your personal account, I don't know the exact process on that one. Yeah.
And so visa wise, I'm only allowed to stay here for 90 days. I think every 180 days or something. How are you living here for so long?
Yeah. So basically like if you are employed here by a company here, then you can get a temporary residence permit that's renewable each year and it gives you a year stay each time. So that's what I did prior, but actually like recently there's a lot of paperwork and stuff. I won't go into it, but so I actually terminated that. So now I'm on the same situation as you are.
Okay. So when you come back next year and you want to stay longer, what are you going to do?
Well, I think a 3-month is good enough for all summer. So I'll probably just bounce out after that. So that's probably my game plan is just like come here, do a 3-month at the peak of the best season and then get out.
Okay. I can see that. I think like part of my weird fantasy is like, I just like Ukraine. I don't know. I can't even describe. It's not one thing. I think we kind of alluded to it earlier, but it's just like a feeling of being a place where you're just treated really well, you know? Like not in terms of customer service.
I was gonna say
but first off, like the buying power is insane, but also I think people are really nice once you guys know them. Like they're really nice.
Yeah, I think it actually is surprising. For example, like people are saying hi in the elevators and stuff, obviously in Russian, and I'm like, before coming to Eastern Europe, I had in my head that everyone was like completely standoffish, and you get elements of that, of course, but I feel like people are a bit more open than I expected. And of course, like the language barrier, once you start overcoming that, it helps. The other thing is just like you and I were both Asian American, right? Like we stand out here a lot. Like we stand out like a sore thumb. If you're in downtown, the main area, like less so because there's more foreigners. But for example, I live here like in a more residential area, and I'm just like completely I zone everything out by now. But basically, when I first came here, just like everyone's staring, you know, like the grandmas, the babushkas on the metro would just like stare with like huge eyes, and the kids will like pull their tug at their parents and say like, oh my god, like I've never seen an Asian person before. So it's interesting, but of course, like, you know, it can be uncomfortable if you're not used to that.
Have you ever felt any unsafety, or have you ever been scammed or robbed or anything?
Yeah, so I say in Ukraine, I mean, obviously be smart about it, right? I say in Ukraine, it is a bit less of a concern. I've had friends who have had issues, more like robberies and muggings. I actually did have an incident in Poland where that happens, but I was probably not being as smart walking home late at night, you know, by myself. Probably should have taken a taxi there. But so yeah, definitely like kind of be aware, situationally aware. I say like during the day and everything, if you're in popular area, all of that, like not really an issue, but like once it's night and you're at like a sketchier area or you're very alone, obviously be concerned of your physical safety a bit more.
And the time in Poland, also with your friends, were they robbed at like gunpoint or knife point, or?
In my situation, it was knife point, and pretty much like it was, I won't go into too much details, but it was just like kind of more, maybe like, or more opportunistic versus like in full intent. With my friend, he got like pretty much like sucker punched, and, you know, they ran off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it happens. I mean, it's definitely a bit rougher than some places in the world for sure. But then again, like you won't be walking around all blinged out in the ghettos of LA or something either. That's not very smart.
I actually got carjacked in LA.
Yeah, exactly.
So I actually feel like I'm safer here than I am in most other big cities, including San Francisco, LA, New York, and even like I feel safer here than like Barcelona in terms of not getting like pickpocketed.
Yeah. Pickpocketing is not so much a thing. I'd say like if you're walking around at night, there's a lot of drunk people sometimes, depending on where you are. So, and sometimes like people come up to you, right? Like generally you just kind of ignore them and, you know, walk faster. So there are like some strange people around at times, but yeah, like all in all for a big city, I think it's probably feels safer than a lot of other big cities I've been.
Yeah, and I agree. And I don't know what their legal system is, but I kind of just assume that if you get caught pickpocketing someone in Ukraine, like they like either kill you or they like put you in this jail that nobody wants to be in, so just nobody does it.
I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. I think maybe it's just because you can't pickpocket for very much money.
Oh, maybe that is. I guess that could be.
Nobody's really carrying around that much cash. Right?
Yeah. Cause in Barcelona, the reason why everyone pickpockets is they just get like something like a $50 fine.
That's ridiculous. That's like a cost of doing business.
Yeah. And they're just like, oh, okay, well, let's, hope not to get caught today. and that's what I hate about it so much. But here, like, I feel like people like are really genuinely hardworking, like good people. And like, I haven't felt that about a culture or a place in a long, long time.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think people kind of keep to themselves a little bit more per the culture. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it also is like, people have to kind of put in the work and everything for survival purposes, right? You gotta pay the bills and feed yourself. So that's part of it. But yeah, I think like cultural wise, maybe like more wholesome would be the word describing it. I don't know if that's the best word.
Yeah, I can see that. And on a side note, like I think what you said earlier about like the stereotypes of what like Ukrainian people would be like, or what the Eastern Europe or kind of like the post-Soviet people were like. I feel like I used to think that Ukrainian people would be very similar to Russian people, but I feel like the more I get to know them, especially in Western Ukraine and Lviv, where it's very, very different, it is such a different culture.
Yeah, I haven't I want to be hesitant here because I haven't really been to Russia at all, right? But from the limited interaction, I feel like the Russians I have kind of tangentially interacted with, probably a bit more of a aggressive culture, like a bit more of what we might be thinking from the West. Whereas the Ukrainian and Ukraine culture, it feels a bit more subdued and less like aggressive, which I like, I don't want to be like all confrontational all the time, right? So.
Well, let's go have some beers at the Hydro Park at night and pick some fights and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Let's do that and then work out before just to get a good pump going. All
right. Well, I'm really happy that not only did we chat about this today, but also that you were pretty much the first person that I knew who had ever come to Ukraine. So you're one of the reasons why I felt comfortable to come here. So thank you for that, Dex.
Awesome. I'm glad to be an example here, a pioneer.
Yeah. And if you guys want to visit Ukraine, I think it's a great time to do it. It's definitely not easy, but it is doable. Check out the blog, johnnyfd.com/Ukraine for the blog post. And if people want to get in touch with you, check out your services or just get in touch, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so my website is essenceofemail.com, and if you ever want to just shoot me an email, it's just x@essenceofemail.com, so pretty straightforward and simple.
I like it. Pretty short as well, at least the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, very cool. So I think we're going to go get some borscht because that's what X eats every day here.
Oh, so delicious.
And we're going to enjoy the nice sunny day. So guys, keep in touch. And if you have any questions or comments, leave something in the notes section. And a big thank you to everyone who's been leaving these great 5-star reviews of the podcast on iTunes. And big thank you to TripStreak, our sponsor. So if you guys want to come out to Ukraine or anywhere else, check out tripstreak.com/travel-like-a-boss. I'll see all of you guys next week. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Travel Like a Boss podcast. If you want to hear more, including the bonus, How to Choose the Perfect Niche episode, join our mailing list at travellikeabosspodcast.com. See you next week, and remember, if you want to travel like a boss, you need to be your own boss. So start your online business today and start living the lifestyle you've always dreamed of.